Hey guys, Enigmatic Mr. L here to talk about what I personally consider to be the worst thing in every main series Fire Emblem game. So for Shadow Dragon, the Blade of Light, as an NES game and the first entry in the series, it makes sense. It's kind of clunky, janky, outdated. As such, I decided to go with item management. There is no trade option here. It's just give item. It leads to a little, while you're doing your shopping in a map, a lot of units just like forming a conga line up to like get their items. And then because of like battle preps hasn't been like fully refined yet, your first like turn or two is end up just like giving items and like rearranging units inventory. I think the game is kind of designed around this because I think most maps there aren't really any enemies in range for the first like turn or two, so it's comes like almost like the developers expected you to be doing this, but it's still just kind of is clunky. For Gaiden, I honestly think Gaiden has the worst maps in the entire series. Not Shadow Dragon before it, not Binding Blade, not Fire Emblem Revelations, but Gaiden, and by extension, its remake Echoes Shadows of Valentia. Alm's maps, they're just kind of bland, boring, and forgettable. And then Celica's maps, with their like myriad of like boat maps, swamp maps, desert maps, they end up just being like extremely frustrating. So that's my pick here. Mystery of the Emblem, I don't think it has like the highs of some of the other games, but in terms of lows, I really didn't know what to put here at first. But in the end, I decided to go with, at least in book two, it's very front loaded with like bad maps, in my opinion. You could argue that this is intentional, like gameplay, story, integration. For the first three maps, Marth and company are like reluctantly following Lang's orders. And it's only after like Marth and Jagan and company decide that they've had enough that I think like the map quality improves a lot. But it doesn't change the fact like your first map trying to teach you like about mounting and dismounting just leaves this awkward choke point. Second map has like a boss that charges out at you, kind of unusual in like the Fire Emblem series, and it can be a little difficult to track down that thief carrying the Lady Blade that they drop. And then the third map, everyone knows how like long and tedious and boring it is. First time I played Mystery of the Emblem, I got to around chapter 3 or so, and just got to put the game down, stopped for like many months before coming back. So it was just kind of a trudge to get through. And after that, I do think things improve a great deal, but it doesn't change the fact that the game has a very slow start. For Genealogy of the Holy War, I decided to go with just tedious monotony. I really wasn't sure what to put as a picture here, but this picture comes directly from the game's article on Wikipedia, which I think just encapsulates, like, yeah, chapter 5, just slowly moving units across desert without any, like, fighting any enemies. And I do think things get, like, less tedious and monotonous on, like, repeat playthroughs where you're more familiar about what happens after you siege each castle, that sort of thing. But doesn't change the fact that no matter how skilled you are, you're just going to be dealing with a lot of turns where, like, nothing really happens. Like here, an example, chapter 5, trudging through the desert. Chapter 4, you just have to like watch NPC armies fight while you just do nothing. First few turns of chapter 2 just involves moving your units without any enemies. Just because the maps in this game are so big, the time it takes to complete one of them, you can complete like 3 or so in other games. It just leads to being like monotonous, so much like a slog to get through. And yeah, you could argue that the maps aren't designed to be completed in one sitting. That's fair. But it doesn't change the fact that if you play the game for a while, like in one map, stop for a while, come back to it, you're still just on the same map as opposed to you're playing pretty much any other Fire Emblem game. You at least have like a new map to work with. The arena, I think, can be tedious as well. Like, yes, it is optional, but you're putting a lot of like gold and EXP up for grabs if you like don't decide to actively engage with it. Personally, it didn't bother me much. My lizard brain loves seeing like numbers go up and units get stronger, getting more gold, seeing how far I can get everyone in the arena. But I definitely understand why people would find that aspect monotonous as well. For Thracia 776, I decided to go with its overly obscure events that feel like they were designed to sell strategy guides. It starts out, it's not so bad, like, how do you unlock the Guiding Chapter from Chapter 2? Just make sure you visit all the villages. None of them get destroyed by bandits. Okay, simple enough. The Guiding Chapter for 4X, make sure all the village NPCs escape. Okay, pretty straightforward. But as you get on, like chapter 8, it's like, make sure you capture this boss, hold on to them, don't release them, and you have to do it before a certain turn before they mount and become, therefore, they cannot be captured. Okay, how are we supposed to know that? And it's really critical you want to do this if you want like Dagdar back and the all too critical Wrath Scroll. And then it comes up again like chapter 12. You have to like capture the boss, hold on to them, don't release them. I think it's on return requirement as well. And you get some really good rewards from the next Gaiden chapter. Tina with her like personal stabs. You really don't want to miss out on. And that's also how you get your dancer. But those can be easy to miss out for someone playing blind. Character recruitments, like how do I recruit the knight Ilios? Well, talk to him with Karen, but make sure Olwen is dead or unrecruited. Or how do I recruit Misha? It's like, talk to her with Karen, then put her to sleep, then capture her, but don't release her. And everyone knows what a pain in the butt Xavier's recruitment is. And I think the big thing is like, I'll make sure you buy about like 14 door keys before endgame. And yes, it's possible to beat the game without buying that many door keys. You have thieves, you have like warp and rewarp stabs. But I just think in general, Thracia 776 is like just reliant on how much the player can like know. I think that's the game's biggest issue. For Binding Blade, there were a few things could have gone with. I think first and foremost, what comes to mind is just Roy is such a terrible unit. But one, I think that's exaggerated, even as someone who often likes to pick jokes at Roy's expense. He's a perfectly fine, like, okay-ish unit for the first 10 or so chapters before you're like, really have more units and you really wish he wasn't taking up a deployment slot. But he uses a sword against first few chapters, have a lot of axe-wielding enemies. He's got weapon triangle advantage. The rapier can be situationally useful. It isn't truly about mid-game where he really falls off and he struggles to do much of anything. But more than that, I think Fire Emblem is often thought of as like an elaborate game of chess. I think it is fitting, at least just for one game. You have a main lord who's very similar to the king, and that he's weak and not able to do much, but he's still your game over condition, and you're trying to protect him. There's also just the fact of unit imbalance, which, again, I think is exaggerated. Outside of like Sophia and Wendy, who are terrible, terrible units, other units are bad to be sure, but, you know, they're usable, especially on normal mode, which is many people's first playthrough. Like, I got Wolt all the way to endgame in normal mode, and he was fine. Like, it's certainly usable. So, my pick for Binding Blade is ambush spawns, enemy reinforcements that move and attack on the same turn they spawn. Now, previous games in the series have had them, but like Thracia 776, there's like an ambush spawn where someone comes at you with a slim sword. Which is a lot different than like Rutger coming up and like attacking Marcus with a killing edge crit and like knocking him out. And things don't get much better from there. It's like chapter 6 is kind of like a breather chapter for the difficult chapter 7. But if you're not careful, the ambush spawns can like take out a unit or two. Chapter 8, you're making good progress when like enemy reinforcements come from the stairs, kill Clarine or something. You have to deal with that consequence. Chapter 16 has like ambush spawn mages with like siege tomes that can like snipe and kill your thief Kath or Chad. Chapter 21 just takes like Wyvern Lord reinforcements like up to the max. In my opinion, Binding Blade has the worst ambush spawns in the entire series. Like other people might point to the games like New Mystery of the Emblem or Awakening. Well, first of all, those games, the ambush spawns only happen on higher difficulties. And second of all, you do have ways to kind of mitigate them at least somewhat. New Mystery of the Emblem gives you like save points, mid save points in the chapter. Awakening, you have like really powerful strategies like pair up and Nosferatu tanking to deal with them. Binding Blade takes the cake, I think, for worst enemy reinforcements in the entire series. Blazing Blade, I think, is an overall solid game. Even if some, let's say, like the highs aren't as high as other games in the series, I think the flaws, they're not that bad. I kind of struggled what to pick here at first. In the end, I decided to go with its rigid difficulty. Eliwood normal mode and Eliwood Hector mode are just far too easy, offer barely anything away to challenge. Just send someone out with a hand axe or a javelin, watch them go to town. You know, that's it. Whereas Hector hard mode, let me be clear, it's not as difficult as things like, say, Radiant Dawn or Conquest or even like Thracia 776. But the way it implements like its hard mode, it's ideas that sound good on paper, in practice, not so much. It sharply reduces the EXP all of your units get, and it reduces the number of deployment slots you have. And I think there's a reason the second one, reduced deployment slots, hasn't been seen like hard mode since. It just leads to a lot of situations where it's like, okay, I'm barely getting EXP anyway. I have such limited deployment slots. Why bother training up like project characters or underdog characters? Just going to rely so heavily on Marcus in the early game, and then later on, like the Juggernaut pre-promoted characters like Hawkeye, Pent, Harkin, etc. There's like maps like defend maps. It's like, okay, I'm barely getting any XP. Just like deploy Hector, unarm him, keep on the throne, like call it a day. It's like, why bother engaging like with these maps when you get so little EXP and you can't really like afford to like train up characters you'd like to. Sacred Stones, whether it's because you have like open skirmishes or the Tower of Volney, or it's just a short game, I think it's like too easy, or especially because it has Seth. And yeah, you can do things like, okay, I'm just going to intentionally not use Seth and bench him, but you have to intentionally handicap yourself just to give yourself something of a challenge. For Path of Radiance has a few minor flaws. The voice acting is, well, it's there. The graphics are a little like, you can tell Intelligent Systems they were trying to struggle with the shift from like 2D sprites to 3D models, but yeah, it's whatever. I do think Path of Radiance has a lot of great things going for it. Solid characters, solid enough story by Fire Emblem standards, a variety of maps, map objectives, bonus experience is cool, but I have to pick something. I decided to go with how slow the enemy phase is, make the game a little bit monotonous to play. Especially gets bad towards the later game. Fire Emblem is kind of notorious for like late game maps, just like enemy spam, so many enemies. You get to maps like Strange Lands or Clash or the final map. That just becomes you do your player phase and like, okay, when do I get to do something again? For Radiant Dawn, I decided to go with the Dawn Brigade. And you might be thinking, well, is it them as characters, their role in the story, them as units and their maps? Yes, all of the above. So Radiant Dawn removed support conversations, which hurts everyone to be fair. But at least with the Grail Mercenaries and other returning characters, you could argue that they got their character development in Path of Radiance. Here, it's like the units, they'll have, conversation or two when they first join. Maybe if they're lucky, one or two base conversations. And then that's it. Just leads to a lot of them feeling flat and underdeveloped. The Blood Pact just feels like textbook definition of like plot contrivance. And then as units just leaves a lot to be desired. Micaiah, if any enemy so much as flicks her, she's going to die. And she has good magic, but not good enough speed to double anything outside of maybe an Armor Knight. So she'll just hit an enemy once hard, but not enough to kill them. Soph, as a Jagan and Thief with like their stat caps, he really falls off towards like later part of the game. Also just knives have a weak weapon type. Nolan, I've never seen a good Nolan. All the Nolans I've seen are like strength screwed, speed screwed, or both. It might be partially because he's at a fairly high base level, so he gains EXP at a slower rate than other units. Edward is really reliant on his first few level ups to get going because of his poor base stats. Leonardo has typical archer problems like no enemy phase. Everyone knows what a joke units like Meg and Fiona are. Then you have like actually good units like Tormod, and especially the Black Knight, but they have availability issues. And then there's Jill, who requires so much investment to like get going. Some would say it borderlines on favoritism rather than reasonable return on investment. So for Shadow Dragon, I decided to go with the game's just very bland. The reason I just have the artwork displayed of like the game here is because I saw some YouTubers, they were ranking the Fire Emblem games, and one of them pointed out, it says, yeah, look at the artwork for previous games. It's like where you get to see these cool battles, these cool characters with swords. It's like here's just a map, which I think is like emblematic of like the problems with the game. Not only there's no like support conversations, no base conversations, leads to a lot of characters feeling bland. The story, it makes sense since it's the first Fire Emblem game, a remake of it, but it's just very forgettable. And it's also just the fact that it has like an ugly art style. Just leads to the whole game feeling just kind of lackluster compared to other entries in the series. A few other problems I could have gone with. It's just like merciless mode. Unless you have like big brain, like rig a crit strategies, it just leads to like slowly breaking the boss's weapons for the first few maps. It can be very obnoxious. And the fact that Gaiden chapters are locked behind killing off your own units. But if they would release the game and just like taken off the highest two difficulty options and just remove paralog chapters altogether, that would have less content, but it would be fixing those two issues. I don't think those two are particularly bad issues. For New Mystery of the Emblem, I decided to go with Chris, the player avatar. And I know I'm sounding like a douchebag modern Fire Emblem elitist here, but say what you will about other avatar characters, they were at least like in an original new game. Chris is like almost like textbook definition of Mary Sue or like Gary Stu. They were never really a part of this world of Arcanea to begin with. And then you read their support conversations, it's just filled with avatar worship. Like, wow, Chris, you're so amazing. You're so great. There's that. To a lesser extent, it's them as like units. Outside of higher difficulties, it's like they kind of break the game where you have one more deployment slot compared to like Mystery of the Emblem. And they're so good as like growth, like unit bonker characters to kind of break the game. Unless you're playing like higher difficulties where you really need there. Unless you like really want to shoot yourself in the foot. Fire Emblem Awakening, you could say I have a bit of a soft spot for it. It was my entry to the series. I do think it has some problems, but I really didn't know what one stood out above the others. Map design is very bland, but it's not terrible. Characters are very anime tropey, but I like the good anime trope here and there. Story is so-so. Like, it serves its purpose. It's whatever. Difficulty is very rigid. Normals fall too easy. Lunatic and Lunatic Plus are far too hard. And then hard mode is close to a balance, but in terms of stats, it's still too easy once your units like get rolling, get the skills they want, and they still have to do with like ambush spawns. In the end, I decided to go with its overpowered, broken mechanics. I'm talking about things like the pair-up system, Nosferatu taking, Gale Force, having a unit with like high luck, give them arms thrift and like a powerful forged weapon, Krobin solo. You could argue that these mechanics, they are fun to use, and to an extent, I would agree, but it doesn't change the fact about halfway through the game, it's like the optimal strategy is just, okay, just send in Robin alone with like a backpack, or Donald if you want like a 0 to hero arc, or just someone trained up to be like a one-man army with like 1-2 range, and just like let him go to town. It's like, okay, the best strategy in this strategy game is just not to think. Say what you will about Fates, I think it really like tuned and fixed these mechanics a lot. And speaking of Fates, that's the next entry. I did consider choosing the terrible S-rank weapons here. Intelligence System was still trying to figure out how do they balance like S-rank weapons if they don't break. Emblem did a whole video on that, talking about how it's like you get them so late, pretty much no one can use them, and they have such severe drawbacks that you're better off just selling them for gold. But I think the bigger issue here is just like how poor the story is. I'm not someone who generally cares about like the story in Fire Emblem games, but when it's so bad here, I think it's worth a mention. I'll try to be brief here because so many people have like talked about it, but in general, all of the routes suffer from a complete lack of world building. Like, they just call it Fates Landia because the setting doesn't even have a name. Hoshido's story, Birthright, it's just very bland for the most part and forgettable. The fact that the Hoshiden siblings aren't really Corrin's blood-related siblings undermines a lot of like the blood versus like loyalty message. Conquest presents itself as you like reforming a corrupt kingdom from within, but Garen is like far too cartoonishly evil for that to work. You know, just like following all of his orders to like the very end of the game. And then Revelations has filled with like plot contrivances, and the fact that it's more or less a gold ending, even like a few characters like Izana and Scarlet die, it just makes the other routes feel obsolete. Fire Emblem Echo Shadows of Valentia is a faithful remake of a terrible game. Map design is still terrible here, but I can understand that to an extent. And they completely reworked the maps from the ground up. At that point, just why not make a new game instead? So I decided to go with its low hit rates. Floor tiles grant 20% evasion to all units. Just leads to a lot of battle exchanges where neither you nor the enemy can hit the broadside of a barn. You could argue that this is faithful to the original, as Gaiden had this problem as well, but doesn't change the fact that it's annoying to deal with as you're playing through the game. A few issues come to mind at Three Houses. The game is very ugly, but it's not a huge problem. Loading times are fairly bad. Difficulty's fairly rigid. Hard mode barely has any challenging. Maddening is just go screw yourself. I think in your first playthrough, the worst part is just like the padding, especially the monastery sections. When you get into like part 2, it's like you don't want to forego the rewards you can get as like getting all your students' motivation up, but it just becomes tedious to visit it again and again and again between like the actual battles. But I think the bigger issue at large here is just how similar the routes are to each other. The first 11 chapters are pretty much the same across like all 3 routes. You get a few different like story beats, but it doesn't change the fact that the maps are exactly the same. And even once you get to like the time skip, for example, like the Blue Lions and Golden Deer routes are exact same for like the first 4 chapters. The Black Eagle routes, you're reusing maps, just kind of your units in different locations. If you play through all 4 routes, including Silver Snow, there are only 2 unique maps. It's Chapter 17 in Black Eagles and the final chapter in Golden Deer. It honestly just makes me feel like, as a major Fire Emblem fan, I want to experience everything the game has to offer. But if I was recommending this to a more like casual or like moderately interested fan, I would just recommend them play one route and then just wonder what could have happened if you had chosen otherwise without actually playing the other routes. And last but not least, we have Fire Emblem Engage. I did make a video about this a while ago talking about my issues with the game, but kind of like with Awakening, there are problems, but to me, nothing really stands out head and shoulders above the rest. Bond rings are kind of like annoying, like gotcha mechanic almost to like try to get. The writing is fairly poor. Some would argue that it's worse than Fates. At least Fan was like grand and epic and like tried and failed, whereas Engage didn't even like try. But to me, I don't think it's as bad as Fates. In the end, I decided to go with like the poor quality of the last few chapters, just so heavy on like enemy spamming, that sort of thing. Like chapter 21, the amount of reinforcements, it's just like, okay, I don't want to deal with this. I'm just going to like one turn clear using a big brain, Micaiah warp, rewarp, dance, Violet dance clear. Chapter 22, unlimited enemy reinforcements to get all the rings. Chapter 23, unlimited enemy reinforcements and like free staff uses. Chapter 25, you can skip a large section of the Lumera map by doing like a big brain, like Micaiah warp / rewarp. But when the best strategy to deal with a map is just not engage with it, that's how you know you've made like a poor map. And that is my pick for the worst aspects of each Fire Emblem game. Any questions, comments, rude or snidey remarks, please let me know below. This is Enigmatic Mr. L, signing out.